All right, good morning, Doug. Today, I wanted to talk about some of the things we see in the news headlines, and especially as they relate to Atlas Shrugged. Now, I read Atlas Shrugged probably 15 years ago originally, mostly because I felt obligated to, because libertarian-minded people would bring it up, and I hadn't read it. So I just kind of pounded my way through it, 1,100 pages or so, a couple or 15 years ago, and I started reading it again recently, and I was shocked by the parallels that we see in today's society today. You've mentioned often 1984. We're getting a mix of 1984 and what's the other one?
Brave New World.
Brave New World. So these two coming together, and I was like, I think that this might. It's those two plus definitely a mix of Atlas Shrugged. So yeah, obviously you met Ayn Rand. She was a key piece of your thinking. But what do you think about Atlas Shrugged and what we're experiencing today?
I think that's a really good observation on your part, and I hadn't actually thought about it before. The fact that they should be read as a trilogy, those three books together, describing where we are and where we're going. Never quite put that together before. Let's see. So I read Atlas Shrugged when? I was very late. When was that? I was probably about 35 when I read it. And it was tough to get through the 100-page John Galt speech and all that type of thing. And when we were talking off camera earlier, your observation is quite correct, is that it's not a novel in the way of, dialogue between characters. It's long soliloquies between characters where they go on and on and on. But it's good writing and it's descriptive anyway. Everybody ought to read it. But I think more of an entrance drug to Rand is Virtue of Selfishness or Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. That's good. And she's got some other novels that are much shorter and lighter. So
yeah, Fountainhead is one I read earlier this year, and it was good, but it didn't capture the moment in the same way that Atlas Shrugged does right now. And I think that one of through these long soliloquies, you can see the way of thinking that's so corrupted in society and in so many people, and how rare it becomes, at least in her world that she creates, for people to think differently, to think of themselves or to actually produce things. And so one of the things that struck me when I was reading the book, when I saw this Bloomberg article that was from talking about how the National Labor Relations Board had ordered Elon Musk to rehire an employee who he'd fired and to delete a tweet that he had written that was sort of anti-labor organizing. And it reminded me of this scene where Hank Rearden is sitting in front of this board of judges who are basically trying to get him to volunteer to submit to their authority. Now, and he's like, but he refuses to do it, refuses to go along with it. And he says, listen, if you want to take me, come with guns. But he's like, if you want to steal my property, then steal it like a common criminal. I'm not going to sign it over to you. And but just the fact that these boards were seeing this happen to Musk, I guess, and seeing even the demanding that you have to comply, but even deleting this tweet was, I don't know, it was shocking to me actually, and showing the parallels of that in today.
Well, okay, so I guess Musk did delete the tweet.
Did he?
Did he? I don't know.
I thought he had not deleted it yet. That was my understanding, although I could be. I'm going to try and click and see if I can find it right now. Nope, it's still live right now. And the tweet was this. This is all the tweet said, Doug, was nothing stopping Tesla team at our car plant from voting union. Could do so tomorrow if they wanted. But why pay union dues and give up stock options for nothing? Our safety record is 2 times better than when the plant was UAW and everyone already has health care. That's the tweet.
That's a very intelligent, reasonable tweet. I mean, so the National Labor Relations Board wanted to have, on what basis? What could they possibly object to in that?
Well, I'll link to the article in the description, but let me see if I can pull it up, what they specifically say about it. Now, they don't have any enforcement ability. Again, they require voluntary compliance. I mean, the whole thing, everything we're dealing with right now requires voluntary compliance. Unfortunately,
compliance, right.
Everyone is voluntarily complying, though, with everything, unfortunately. But let me see if I can find on that.
Well, like we were talking about the other day regarding Musk, I mean, there's plenty of reason to suspect that he's not on the same page with Zuckerberg and Bezos and Cook and all these other horrible people. And this is a further indicator. I mean, but it's even worse. They expect you to roll over on your back like a whipped dog. And more than that, they expect you to wet yourself by apologizing. And I certainly don't think he's the kind of guy that's going to apologize, or at least I hope he doesn't. But all these people, they make obeisance and they say, yes, I unintentionally harmed other people and please excuse me and blah, blah, blah. It's just disgusting. You've got to completely lose respect for people like that.
Yeah, and it seems it's just very few people seem to be able to stand up to that negative public opinion of them, or at least that public opinion that the woke are attempting to create about people. Most people just fold under that. And this is something that happened that you see in Atlas Shrugged, where everyone was just afraid of taking responsibility because they can only get blamed and sort of ground up in the system, but they're also just want to appear to be on the right side of things. And there are very few people that'll just stand up and say how it is. And all those people, like one by one, sort of disappear in the book. That's one of the key things that happens in the book. But I see things. One thing that struck out to me too, that was related to the idea of in Atlas Shrugged, was the importance of Ayn Rand's version of the woke was that, feeling is what really mattered. You had to care, you had to feel. And they were always trying to say, people, get out of your head and your rational mind, and you need to feel more. And there's always that appeal for that. And then the other day I'm watching the CDC director. I don't know if you saw this clip, but she just says, it seems like it's a scripted off script moment actually, but they say she went off script and then she just says how scared she is. And she gets teary eyed, worried about.
I didn't see that, but I read about that. That is absolutely shocking. The level of hysteria about COVID.
Well, but I think the important thing is that she was demonstrating that she feels like she cares. You know what I mean? I think that's the important thing.
Right. It's very important to draw a line between thinking and feeling. And most people use those two words interchangeably. And that's very incorrect.
It is. And the other one, I think someone who's really, really good at this projecting feeling game is AOC. And she was people trying to get her on the hypocrisy of how she was really worried about kids in cages when Trump was president, and how now she's not. And I think you got to stop focusing on the hypocrisy, because there is a double standard, and that's just the way it is. And stop arguing about it, I think. But she is very good at demonstrating her feeling that she really cares all the time. And it's working. I mean, it really is working. It's working. People are falling for this, that's what matters. Not what you do, it's how you project the way you feel. And that drove Ayn Rand crazy, it seems to me, because she spends an enormous amount of time covering that in Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, and you can't have an intelligent conversation with a person that does nothing but feel. I mean, it's worse than having a conversation with your dog. That's always a pleasant conversation, even if one-sided, but the other person just feels it's like you're dealing with a person that's irrational. Well, yeah, if you only feel and don't think, don't reason, it's almost by definition irrational, and it's impossible. This is why it's sometimes I wonder if people who are converted, that kind of the light bulb turns on and are converted to libertarian thinking, and I've been instrumental with at least a few people in having that happen. I really feel guilty because, well, it's taking the red pill.
Yes.
Because it's really pretty comfortable taking the blue pill.
It really is. It really is. I don't know how you can feel guilty about waking people up, though. I mean, I know people might want to go back to sleep, and you can't once you've taken the red pill, but it seems like it's a worthwhile pursuit, trying to help people help free their own minds of the insanity that's around you.
Well, and one of the funny things about it is that at this point, almost everybody, I guess, has seen The Matrix, and they all know red pill, blue pill. And I imagine that all these people think of themselves as red pill takers.
They do.
So it's the situation is really hopeless. It really is.
Have you heard? Okay, so that is something called being black pilled. Have you heard that expression, Doug?
Haven't heard that yet. Oh, that
So,
sounds interesting.
so black pilled is when you basically, after you've taken the red pill and you recognize how massive the forces are that are sort of the inertia that's in the world, and you feel like it's hopeless, that there really is, nothing that can be done. That's it's nihilism, and it's being black pilled. And honestly, it's that sort of, you can get black pilled by not, you don't have to take the red pill to become black pilled, I think, because I think you have all the Antifa people are definitely black pilled because they're nihilistic and they believe they see, well, the best description of nihilism I've heard is where destruction is seen as progress. So so I feel like that's where we are in our culture today. Destruction is seen as progress. But there's another pill, there's the white pill. And the white pill is that, yes, you can have total recognition, you're red pilled of all of the forces that are arrayed against you, but you can see how it comes out on the other side as actually being good. Because all the structural problems that exist in the world that we live in today, I mean, the things you've been talking about for 30 years, they can't be swept away by little tinkering or voting for the right person or whatever. Like it has to fall over on its own accord. And that's actually a possibility. Now, along the way, of course, lots of people can get crushed in that falling giant that is our system, but it's only where these forces are so intense and it's all coming to a head that there's actually a possibility that you could create something better. And that's the white pill view.
Yeah, and of course, we're justifiably accused of being doom and gloom and pessimistic. But look at the bright side, the Soviet Union. I mean, it was absolutely a science fiction nightmare from, let's say 1920 to 1990. So that's 70 years. And now that it's collapsed, it's said, and I think correctly, that there are more communists in American universities than there are in all of Russia. And this is interesting because talk about being indoctrinated and forced to live the life from the time of your birth. And it all just blew away in the Soviet Union. So maybe there is hope for America from that. If Russia could reform, then perhaps America can too.
Yes, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm trying to be a white pill guy, Doug. That's my goal at this point because there's no point in being black pilled, honestly.
I wonder how violent these people are going to get, though. Well, just like the Nazis in the 30s and the Reds when they took over Russia, it got very violent. So it makes me think of famous end scenes of violent movies, and I ask myself, what if you're confronted with a situation, is it wise or preferable to go out like Pike at the end of The Wild Bunch, which is one of the best ultra-violent scenes ever filmed? Probably my favorite single movie, incidentally, is The Wild Bunch. Or would you be better off like Roy, the android, at the end of Blade Runner, which is a fantastic movie, not the new one, but the original one, where he just, he doesn't kill Harrison Ford's character. He helps him up and just gives a great speech. Is that better? Or, well, for that matter, The Matrix itself, I guess. So what do you do? Or V for Vendetta, which is great too.
That is great. I think I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends upon the specifics of the situation you encounter. But I think fundamentally I definitely believe in the Sun Tzu view of war, that you don't attack anything where it's strong. You let your enemy's weaknesses consume the enemy, and you just try and avoid conflict more than anything else. I mean, you really try and allow it to be the Leviathan to sort of consume itself, I guess. I think that's the only way it can happen.
Yeah, and of course, philosophically, I'm actually a Taoist, and Taoism's very much Sun Tzu's approach to warfare. It's the watercourse way, where you just let things flow around you.
Right.
It's more, in a martial art, it's much more Aikido than karate.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I think about, I use Aikido as an example with people all the time. It's like you have to, the best you can do is use its momentum use the enemy's momentum against the enemy. But other than that, it's just to avoid conflict, avoid being hit, avoid the force, the direct hits.
A wave of intellectual confrontation coming from the bad guys. They've got these two things, ESG, environment, sustainability, and governance, which, well, everybody loves the environment. I like the birds and the bees and friendly bunnies and sunny skies. Everybody likes that. So how can you be against the environment? Sustainability, well, sure. You don't want things to fall apart. And governance, I guess that means somebody supervising things. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, but this is a really big thing with corporate boards now, where you're supposed to emphasize that as opposed to making money, which is to say, creating capital. And they're really quite clever in the way, in this, as well as 100 different ways, they corrupt the language and have things mean things other than what you thought they meant before. And the environment of the ESG, which it's almost becoming official government policy being imposed on corporate boards now. Well, not official government policy so much as policy of pension funds, insurance companies, and
the exchanges themselves. I remember we did something on the NASDAQ coming out and talking about these standards being requiring transparency or reporting from all the companies that are traded on NASDAQ about their ESG and about their diversity and things like that.
And you've got to rate yourself, actually. That's part of it. You have to rate yourself, which is very reminiscent of what the communists have, especially the Chinese communists, was self and mutual criticism sessions, where you'd all sit around and talk about how you'd failed the group, how horrible you were, and then you point out and accuse somebody else and say, well, this is your problem. Tell us more about your problem. This is exactly the same thing. And the way they get around this is so corrupting, because these sound like good things, but environment, okay, that's cool. But you're supposed to put the environment before anything else, basically. I mean, you can't do anything that harms a blade of grass. If you harm the environment, forget about what you're doing or justify it somehow. Environmental impact statement on everything. And then sustainability. Well, this is kind of a stupid one. I mean, nothing is sustainable in the long run. Everything winds down. I mean, that's a fundamental law of the universe. As I've often pointed out, it's the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the very few laws that I happen to believe in. So sustainability. A lot of things shouldn't be sustained. A lot of things should be destroyed and broken up, and they're meant to be. So that's stupid to be sustainable. It gets you into a whole ball of wax, kettle of worms. And governance. Yeah, well, that's a little bit more overt. There's got to be somebody that's like in charge of doing this. That must be what having a diversity officer is about. That's kind of governance. I mean, who's making sure that everybody's playing fair and nice with each other?
Right. In fact, there wasn't SOCOM, which is the Southern Command, which is where most of the special forces. Yeah, the diversity officer.
Yeah, because it's funny how the military has transformed itself, where special operations groups, SEAL teams and special forces and Rangers, and there are many of them now. Everybody's got, all the services have their own, hotshot types. And apparently there's about 75,000 guys that are classified like that. It's a big deal, And this guy, what's his name?
Oh, I can't. I'll have to look up his name.
He looks like a dough ball that, you know, couldn't run a mile. I mean, he looks like an Ayn Rand character, quite frankly, Wesley Mooch or somebody like that. You know, and when the most badass guys, how are the most badass guys in the military going to react to having somebody like that sort them out by race and gender and so forth? I mean, he's lucky that one of them don't take him out.
His name is Richard Torres Estrada.
Got to be so suspicious of people with hyphenated names. I presume it's hyphenated.
It is hyphenated. He looks like he's been a director of accounting for the last 15 years. It's kind of like the demeanor I get from him looking at his picture here.
Well, personally, I can't believe that the kind of guys that want to join the special operations groups of the military, these guys have all got to be shaking their heads and saying, "No, fuck this! I'm quitting. This is too much." I mean, it's going to create the one place where there's really no or very little racial antagonism, which is the military. I mean, of all places, there's less there, I think. I mean, this is going to actively create it where some unit, a guy cycles into the unit because he's black or because he's gay or, God forbid, trans in a military unit like that, or you got to have a chick there. This is crazy. I think the special ops guys, I'll bet they're going to have lots of resignations and maybe some fragging too. Who the hell knows?
Yeah, and it's the undermining of the idea of merit itself, and and this is something that Rand talks about quite a bit. She's like the things that are held as valuable in society or within the culture in her dystopian book here are things that don't have anything to do with making the world better or with merit or with production or anything like that. And I mean, we saw,
or even just plain justice. I mean, you do a good job, you're rewarded.
Right. And the military has been a place where merit has been a key thing. And I think it was really funny, not funny, but you have like the Secretary of Defense, who's an African-American guy who was on the board of Raytheon before this. It is super rich, who's now the director of the Secretary of Defense, talking about how he was mistreated as a black member of the military. And I mean, he rose to the tippy top. So it's almost like self-evidently false that there's real discrimination.
Exactly. He's the proof that there really isn't any in the military. That's absolutely true. But actually, once you get to the general officer level, you rise because you're good at backslapping and backstabbing more than anything else. I mean, the generals, especially today, maybe it was always that way, are basically political operatives.
Yeah, it's like if you make it, you get to like lieutenant colonel status, and you either end up, in the political echelon of the military, or else you get drummed out. And like that's the kind of the point when you go to lieutenant colonel, the full bird colonel. At least that's what I've seen.
And it would appear that the wokesters pretty well control the general officer corps at this point, and they're going to be very adamant about keeping out people that believe in the older values. So maybe the military is really screwed. They're getting it from every angle now.
They really are. Not only are they deployed, their anti-terrorism efforts in something like 81 countries now. That's the anti-terrorism one. There's troops in something more than 100 countries. So they're stretched thin in that regard, and then they're being gutted from the inside with these efforts.
And then this guy you were just talking about, is he the chairman of the Joint Chiefs? That
Secretary, I think he's Secretary of Defense.
Secretary of Defense. Okay, fine. That's where the big money is. So he's really moved up to the top. What was I going to? Oh yeah, he's the one that gave the speech about how we have domestic terrorists in our ranks, and we have to root them out of our ranks. So that was apparently a pointed reference to Trump voters in the military ranks. So
the information I've heard from people who are still serving in the military about like this re-education process that they've had over the last month or so, It's been pretty shocking. Some of the things they said, they're identifying all kinds of groups as potential terrorist groups, from like the 3%ers to the, oh gosh, yeah, some of these police groups, essentially. Some of these very common, very well understood groups that were just like former military who support the Constitution.
Yeah.
But he's
No,
done.
no, and this is just the first, this is just the first, this is just the first month or so of Bolsheviks controlling the country. So they're going to get the bit in their teeth and they're going to run with it. No question about it. And, oh, but going back to what's happening to boards of directors, which is being enforced by money managers, insurance companies, and the like. The other one, other than environment, sustainability, and governance, is equality, diversity, and
Inclusion.
inclusion. And of course, the first one, there seems to be some confusion about whether it's equality or equity. And I'd say that both of them are, well, certainly even equality is very problematical because it's not equality of opportunity. Who could object to that? I mean, if you're going to run a proper business, it's got to be, you want the best guy for the job. Hey, I'm here to make money. I need the guy that's going to do best for me. But equity, this sounds a little bit like equality, but it sounds like equity. That must mean making everybody a part owner, which basically means giving them stuff. I think that's what it's all about. It must be about reparations in some form.
Yeah, it really seems that way. It seems like you have, it seems like, yeah, it seems like you're giving, not reparations, but it's like how you give people the certain advantages if you're a certain race when you apply to a university and you get affirmative action. Essentially, you get into the university because you're of a certain group. So it seems like equity seems to be those sorts of actions. At least that's what I get out of it.
I think you're right. That, and you don't get into a university if you're part of another group. For instance, if you're of Oriental extraction, you're actively discriminated against because the culture of Chinese people is to work harder and value. So a lot of them are being left out for affirmative action hires. So, and I pity the poor black guy that gets in, can't handle it. He's going to feel, well, I guess he's going to feel discriminated against because everybody else gets it and he doesn't. So,
the worst part is, imagine you're a black person who is as good as anyone else in class. I mean, going to Harvard or whatever, but you never really know if the reason you got in might have been only because of your skin color. Like that all of your work, all of your intelligence, all of that, you never know. They never tell you. So you go your whole life thinking, gosh, I really need this affirmative action here, or else I wouldn't have been able to make it, or I'm not good enough on my own, or something like that. Like the most successful, the brightest and best are punished so indiscriminately by these things. It drives me nuts. And no one ever focuses on that. No one ever focuses denying the success of somebody who does achieve it regardless of the race.
You're not allowed to argue against these things. Of course, I say whatever the hell I want, anywhere I want. I just don't frankly care what other people think, but you're not allowed to argue about this. And most people don't think about it enough. They assume that if you don't believe this claptrap, well, I must be a racist. I've got to cleanse my mind. And then it's more direct. It goes on to diversity. And they're not talking about intellectual diversity. They're talking or diversity of experience or diversity of talents, all good things. It's strictly diversity of race and sexual aberrations. And I've got to say here, I've never had anything against gay people, or I don't care what they do. I don't care if they screw chickens in their own time. I really don't. But you've got to say that there are certain norms. And these things used to be called perversions. But to me, if somebody is a trans, hey, they can be a nice person. Odds are against it because it's like self-mutilation is what it is. And just like somebody that cuts themselves has some kind of psychological problem. But this kind of diversity is basically, it's basically psychological aberration. you're like screaming, I've got something wrong with the way I'm wired. I've really got a pinball bouncing around in this one part of my brain, and it could bounce around into my brain proper and screw everything up. I'm actually a little bit crazy. But they're encouraging that.
Well, it's certainly like Rand talked about, where the highlighting of victimhood, like the people who suffer, is a virtue, and in this book, in Atlas Shrugged. And so that's considered something that is more important, I guess, than success or achievement or happiness or whatever. Suffering and victimhood is valuable. And I think that a lot of the diversity stuff is just different subsets of oppressed minorities, they would consider them. So people who are essentially victims, making sure that they're getting, that they're included in the conversation. Although this might be,
everybody can be an oppressed minority, because if you want, you can identify as whatever you want. And who's going to argue with you if you identify as part of a real or imagined oppressed group? I mean, it actually gets into bizarro world, as does the last thing, which is called inclusion. Look, I like to be friendly and get to know, but inclusion is like forcing somebody into a group that, it's very artificial. It's like if you have, I guess, all these fraternal societies that immigrants put together. You had an Italian club, an Irish club, a Jewish club, you name the ethnic group or the nationality. So what are you supposed to have somebody from that's not part of that? Are they supposed to join? Is that what inclusion is all about? It's kind of part of it's destroying the old bonds of society.
yes,
that's what it's all about.
That's exactly what it is, because at the same time, I can tell you on the education level, at least within middle schools and high schools, and I've seen this personally with my own kids, they are encouraging the formation of these groups, these clubs after school, based upon their identity. So whether they're LGBTQ, or they're the Black students, or they're the,
of course,
they're encouraging all of this association by these identity groups. But I think the fundamental thing, they call it inclusion because it's fundamentally meant to destroy any of the traditional groups that wouldn't separate people based upon their identity.
And it's making people look upon themselves as being primarily Black. That's what I am. I'm Black. I'm not an individual. I'm not this. I'm identified by my race. And the same thing with people that have sexual peculiarities or aberrations. That's how they identify. And everybody that's not here is the other and my potential enemy. So this inclusion is actually, like so much of this stuff, doing exactly the opposite of what they claim to be doing. And of course, corporations, this is the next thing for corporate boards now. They have to show that they're being EDI as well as ESG. It's going to destroy American corporations. It's another good reason, as this is thoroughly inculcated into boards of directors and below. It's why corporations will be worth less and they'll earn less. They just won't be as. And this is so destructive.
This is so much like Atlas Shrugged, because essentially the society's pursuits were on these arbitrary, these abstract measurements of things about feeling and victimhood, and ultimately it led to the destruction of any productive activity in the world, where a lot of people fundamentally opted out. They just opted out. Like, why? And the whole idea of Atlas Shrugged, of course, for people who haven't read the book or don't know it, is that there are really productive people who carry on their backs the world. And what would happen if those people just simply shrugged off that responsibility? What would happen to the world? And then I think we're going to see it. As these things get because just fight. At what point, when does Elon go, yeah, never mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's too bad he doesn't, at that point, if he sets aside, sells enough stock or whatever, that, he gets X number of billions set aside, if he decides that they're just too ridiculous, if he owned the whole thing himself, it'd be great if he just blew it all up and said, to hell with you people.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be great if he actually did that, which is what Rand's hero in the Fountainhead did. I believe he blew up his building because they made him put some kind of a ridiculous facade around it or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly there are some of the business leaders in Atlas Shrugged that do the same thing. So one of the things that relates to this equality versus equity thing, I think fundamentally is that equality is equality of opportunity, and rooted in that is this idea of merit, or based upon some objective standard like producing results. And it just seems like there's this deep effort to undermine the idea of a meritocracy completely. And you see that certainly within the military and with the SOCOM guy, but also there was an article I shared with you about what was happening in, I think it was Oregon public schools, where there's a new bill introduced in the Oregon state legislature, which mandates that schools use a merit-based system when making staff reductions, unless the merit-based system interferes with the school's diversity ratio. But then it goes on to explain that what merit actually is, and merit, by the change the definition of it, actually has to do with whether or not somebody has participated in all the diversity and inclusion training that they've.
Of course. So it's a new definition of merit in addition to everything else.
Exactly.
These horrible people are covering the bases. They're covering all the bases. They're from top to bottom. They're you have to admire how clever they are, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that dawned on me, maybe certainly within the last year, as all this COVID hysteria and everything else has happened, the Black Lives Matter stuff. It just became clear that we have underestimated the situation that's happening. At least I felt like I had deeply underestimated, because not even a whack-a-mole strategy could possibly work, because it's everywhere. And it seems to be part of the bubbling up of the culture, and it's got to run its course, it seems.
Yes, it's just like the virus itself. Look, instead of wearing the equivalent of a chain link fence to keep out mosquitoes in front of you, all viruses by their nature go viral. You can't stop them, really. So social distancing and mask wearing, it's a 100% total fraud. And yes, I don't want to contract the coronavirus. Who does? Just like I didn't want to contract the Asian flu or the Hong Kong flu or bird flu or swine flu or SARS. You don't want to contract any of these things. But what happens is that everybody catches it, it burns itself out, and then you wait for the next one. But this is dragged on, and it's going to go on forever. And if you don't wear your mask in places, I mean, the fines in some places they're backbreaking. They're huge, with jail terms in certain localities, and it's being enforced nationally now by the Biden regime
and internationally.
It's like if you went to a rally. It's like if you went to a rally in Germany in the 30s, you'd better be wearing your armband, or the crowd might attack you. And if you weren't wearing your red scarf in Russia, same thing would happen. So,
well, and unfortunately,
same thing here, except we have these ridiculous masks.
Well, the one thing, it's also happening internationally, though, and obviously you're in Uruguay and you can see masks wearing around you, I'm sure. But one of our viewers was relaying a story in our Telegram channel about how he's in Portugal, and during the lockdowns last year, they had rules and they had fines associated with like traveling more than a certain distance from your registered address and stuff like that, wearing masks in public, all of those things. But they weren't really enforcing it. They've rolled out new lockdowns again. And he was relaying a story about how he was driving to his girlfriend's house, and they had checkpoints, and they asked him where he was going, and he foolishly told them where he was going. He said he foolishly told them, and he said, I told him the truth. He was going to see his girlfriend, and they wrote him a fine for it. They wrote him a ticket for it, and he's like, it's no big deal for me, but it's like 300 euros. And for your average Portuguese person, it's very expensive. And so that kind of thing will definitely dissuade you. And So they're starting, they had it not in really enforced rules, but not enforced last time. Now they're being enforced. And as soon as they start adding some more criminal penalties to that, it could get dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. And oddly, it seems to be getting worse, not better. It does make me, well, is it a conspiracy theory, or is it the fact that you just get a certain type of person that's drawn to and wants to work for the government? I think it's mostly the latter. The government draws busybodies and criminal personalities. So you don't have to believe it's a conspiracy. You just have to believe that, just like certain type of persons drawn to Las Vegas, certain type of persons drawn to New York, certain type of persons drawn, same thing happens with the government everywhere at all levels.
Right. And I mean, you wouldn't be drawn to the government if you didn't think the government were somehow the solution to the problems the world faced. And so if you believe the government is the solution, then the government just needs more tools, needs more powers, needs more authority. So it's just, you could see how, I mean, I'm more of a conspiratorial minded person than you are, I know, but you could see how, I can see how it could just be this inertia of this. People really sincerely believe that the right answer is more of us, more government, more involvement by us, more regulations to keep bad behavior out.
Well, anyway, I think you saw something that was right in front of us all the time. And I didn't notice it before, I didn't think about it. It said, along with Brave New World and 1984, Atlas Shrugged should be mentioned as like a guidebook for what's happening now before us. And so from now on, I'm going to do that. It's a trilogy.
It is a sad one, unfortunately, but yeah, it is interesting. I think we'll just leave the conversation there for today with the Atlas Shrugged stuff. But I just want to remind people that this Thursday we have Paul, that's tomorrow, I guess, Paul Rosenberg joining us, and to talk about his ideas around parallel society. And I think everyone will enjoy that. I know I will. And Paul is definitely.
And I think his book, The Breaking Dawn, actually deals with some of this stuff, and it was written several years ago. So we can have to ask him more about that too.
Yeah, it does. It shows Paul's ahead of his time. Certainly is. And we'll get to that tomorrow with him. All right. Thanks for now.